From year to year, month to month, week to week, and day to day, people across the world are obsessed with a phenomenon that is professional wrestling. But why? 101 reasons to love professional wrestling. There are many components of professional wrestling that should be both understood and celebrated, in no particular order.
Bitter rivals. It is a natural instinct to be competitive, and with that comes rivalries. It happens between countries that do not get along. The Bible featured Cain and Abel, two brothers who became rivals. There are battling brands like Coca-Cola and Pepsi, or McDonald's and Burger King. In sports, how much fun would it really be if there weren't bitter rivals? It is that competitive rivalry that has just that little bit more passion and hatred. In the ever so passionate world of professional wrestling, there have been many bitter rivals. The first bitter rivals, like George Hackenschmidt and Frank Gotch, were mainly rivals because they were both big box office draws that held on to the top championships. Then as theatrics came into play, the storyline contraption of a feud could become a bitter rivalry based on how well it was remembered and how well the performers pulled it off. Terry Funk and Dusty Rhodes made the world cringe at the carnage each man would inflict on each other. Storied rivalries like Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant, Ric Flair and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, Stone Cold Steve Austin and Vince McMahon, Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, and many more would have rivalries that would be hard to not consider bitter. These are the big matches that fill the arenas full of people, get them to order pay-per-views, and creates the folklore that is professional wrestling. And that's just the stuff in front of the camera. Like any industry, there is going to be conflict behind the scenes, and this has provided wrestling fans with a whole other world of bitter rivals. Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, Bret Hart and Vince McMahon, Vince McMahon and Ted Turner, Vince Russo and Jim Cornette, Hulk Hogan and Self-Respect. These rivalries don't end with a scripted show. There are people who just don't like each other, screwed each other over, or were just in direct competition. In a perfect world, everybody gets along behind the scenes, but they just don't. Professional wrestling fans have proved one thing: inquiring minds always want to know. Then there are times where the behind-the-scenes heat is turned into a storyline, and eventually everything is okay. Fun times. There are points in a wrestler's career when a feud gets so heated that fans just automatically assume that rivalry would last forever. If you see Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan in the ring, you will always expect one to attack the other. If Vince McMahon and Steve Austin are ever in the ring together, under any circumstance, it would be expected to see Austin drop him with his stunner. Sure, there is a level of mutual respect, but as a fan, it's not hard to anticipate the worst. And that's the legend of hate that will always fill arenas. Independence. The idea of overnight success is a myth. Jeff Bezos has said real overnight success actually takes 10 years. The fresh new actor did a dozen small movies before being a leading man. A band that's winning Grammys played small shows and learned what worked and what didn't. The most hilarious comedian surely bombed at local open mics on their way to becoming a household name. That superstar athlete didn't just show up and win MVP. They formed their skills in school and the early seasons of their careers. And just the same, professional wrestling stars don't automatically show up and get put on television. Professional wrestling has functioned on a system that is similar to Major League Baseball. In independent wrestling, there are different levels and milestones to level up. To make it to the big time, or even to grab a one-off background role, almost all roles are casted through the independent wrestling companies. These small independent wrestling promotions are made up of people who are chasing their dream to one day main event WrestleMania. And then there's those who are just seeking the life story of being able to say they were once a professional wrestler. For these wrestlers, it's living out their childhood goals while working and maintaining a 9-to-5 job. These smaller shows are often in bars, community centers, and pretty much anywhere a ring can be set up and the locals can gather. The best of this level travel from area to area, working for different independent wrestling promotions, with the goal of getting noticed by a large company that can offer them a full-time contract. Then, like the minor league baseball system, there are those who are on their way down. These wrestlers have made it to the mainstream television shows, but have now found themselves back in the independents. Older wrestlers will wrap up their careers doing sometimes decade-long and glorified farewell tours. Then there are those who go back to the indies to touch up on their skills, hone in on their craft, find a new character, or just wait it out until their potential is once again noticed by those who make the big decisions. The WWE still scouts independents, but now they, along with athletes and other performers, are brought into their own minor league system. They will work their way into NXT, and then up to Raw or SmackDown. Essentially, you have to become a big fish in a small pond, and then a bigger pond, and then, eventually, the ocean. But this doesn't mean independents don't exist. They certainly do. Whether it's on the way up or on the way down, there is a magic to independent wrestling. It's a chance to drive down the street, to escape to a magical world of performers who are doing what they do out of genuine love for professional wrestling. If it's 1,000 people at a small auditorium or 15 people at a car lot, these wrestlers are living their WrestleMania dreams. Every cheer, every t-shirt sold, and with every photo taken. In baseball, they talk about for the love of the game. In professional wrestling, there is no bigger love for this crazy world than independent wrestling. Submission holds. The roots of wrestling go back to the ancient Egyptian and Greek cave drawings and artwork. Grappling is embedded in our history. It would serve as the highlighted competition of the ancient Olympic Games. In life, we know this pain as an older sibling or a school bully making you say uncle as they torture you with a noogie and a headlock. It's a test of strength and a display of dominance. And while Greco-Roman wrestling is still a respected Olympic competition, it is not exactly the same as professional wrestling. Two wrestlers face off in a physical war with the goal of outlasting and defeating their opponent. This happens by applying submission holds. Since the earliest days of professional wrestling, the idea of making an opponent submit was the only way to claim a victory. The wrestler grabs an arm, a leg, a neck, or a combination of limbs and stretches their opponent, causing excruciating pain. They stretch, and they stretch. The tangled wrestler is left with only a few choices: tap out, or verbally give up, pass out, or escape. Gory Guerrero invented the La Dia Cabala, which would be more commonly known as, thanks to the Sheik, as the camel clutch. There are many basic moves from
Greco-Roman wrestling that are still successfully used today, like Bobby Lashley with his vicious full Nelson. There are multiple moves that involve attacking the legs, like the figure 4, a leg lock known by millions, thanks to the Nature Boy, Ric Flair. Then there's attacking the back and legs with any of the variations of the Boston Crab, or Bret the Hitman Hart's finishing move, the Sharpshooter. It goes on and gets increasingly painful and increasingly creative. And then there's the more unorthodox, like Mick Foley's Mandible Claw, or Killer Kowalski's Stomach Claw. In today's landscape of wrestling, we are more accustomed to seeing strikes and aerial attacks. But even now, submission holds are still part of the foundation of this art form. The classic submission holds are still around, but are rarely used as a finishing move. But there are still some wrestlers that use the tactical tool that is a submission hold finisher. At the heart of professional wrestling, there is always going to be a point where a wrestler will grab their opponent's limb and stretch. Ring bell spots. In a battle, it is not uncommon to utilize the element you are in. When you are in the playground, a handful of dirt is always there to throw. When you are in the business world, you use corporate maneuvers to move up the ladder. And when you fight in space, of course, you use space lasers. It could even be tactical, as it is in sports. Boxers and fighters use the ropes and cage to gain the advantage. In professional wrestling, utilizing one's element isn't always to gain the upper hand. Sometimes it's to flat out cheat, but it's always an act of survival. There are various foreign objects at ringside that a wrestler could use. Of course, there are chairs, tables, and randomness under the ring. But then, there's the ring bell, the device that is used to signify the start of a match, the end of a match, and is used in 10-bell salutes for fallen heroes. Simple and to the point. A wrestler goes outside the ring, takes the ring bell, and then institutes it into the match as a weapon. It doesn't happen often. The big blow to the head is a big deal. There is the option to tease, and even the option of ringing it in someone's ear. And of course, it's always a delight to see someone get their bell rung. Kendo Sticks. The evolution of weaponry has gone from interesting and practical to obscene and unneeded. During the lineage of tools of war, some things just stick around. There are still those who practice archery, while moved on to automatic rifles and missile launchers. We still use fire and heat in war. Still, you don't want to show up to a gun wielding a knife. Sometimes a weapon sticks around just because it honors an antiquated past. The Singapore cane is one of those. In Singapore, caning is a form of corporal punishment. Introduced to Singapore by the British in the 19th century, it's a tradition that has stuck around to the modern day. When someone commits a crime, a form of punishment their government will dish out is whacking people with canes. The cane is known as a rattan, a specific wood about a half-inch thick and soaked in water overnight to make it supple and to prevent splintering. But don't worry, they use a smaller cane when caning juveniles. So there's that. In 1994, an 18-year-old American was convicted of vandalism while visiting Singapore. This would make the news as the team would end up receiving 4 lashes. And if it's in the news, professional wrestling, for better or for worse, is listening. Paul Heyman's Extreme Championship Wrestling was building steam.
It was known as being brash, vulgar, and a hardcore wrestling promotion that is still today decades ahead of its time. While certain attitudes and extreme styles were adopted from the company, the lightning that was captured in a bottle has not been duplicated. With his finger on the pulse, Heyman would introduce the Singapore cane into professional wrestling. During that same year, Sandman and Tommy Dreamer would compete in a Singapore cane match. The loser would receive 10 lashes from whoever became the victor. In this career-defining moment, Tommy Dreamer took 10 whacks, each more painful, with more tears welling up in his eyes. He would look up and ask Sandman for another, and another. This dramatic presentation of extreme endurance would change things forever. The cane used was not the single piece of wood. It would actually be a kendo stick. A kendo stick is multiple pieces of bamboo put together to form one cane. The crack of it hurts, but it's nothing in comparison to the stick from Singapore. And yet still, the reputation is not that much better. The cane would become a signature for the likes of Sandman and later on Just Incredible. There would be Singapore cane matches where wrestlers would be provided numerous canes to use in their match. As time would go on, the Singapore cane would just be referred to as what it was, the kendo stick. Like the ladder, chair, table, the kendo stick would just become part of wrestling, as in we just accept it to be there and to be used. Now it's just something that's already under the ring. Chairs and tables are needed for furniture items. There's tools, ladders, and even fire extinguishers. That makes sense to be under the ring. But what is the practical reason for there to be a kendo stick under the ring? Nobody really knows. So those who dare to might as well grab the stick, approach the opponent, and swing for the stars. Finishing moves. It's that climax with the extra oomph that's truly rewarding. A well-planned meal has a dessert. Many well-composed songs has that big ending. Everything has an apex. A well-fought fight has a final blow. Anything theatrical has an ending. Professional wrestling has both the final blow and the theatrical ending that leaves the fans in joyous awe. More times than not, the ending of a match is often preceded by a finishing move. There are a few different types of finishing moves in professional wrestling. There are those who utilize a submission move to make their opponent submit via verbally giving up, tapping out, or even passing out. Long before Ric Flair's Figure 4 or Bret Hart's Sharpshooter, old-time wrestlers would use leg locks, neck locks, or just flat-out bear hugs to take out their opponent. There are finishing moves that require a setup that tend to crown many champions, like a jackknife powerbomb from Kevin Nash, or a tombstone piledriver from The Undertaker. Some finishing moves just come out of nowhere. When you bring up finishing moves that come out of nowhere, it's impossible not to mention Randy Orton's RKO. But there is also the Stone Cold Stunner from Steve Austin, or a simple surprise strike in the likes of a big knockout blow through a monstrous punch from Big Show, or of course, a super kick from Shawn Michaels. The final finishing move type is a crashing splash onto your opponent. In the most basic form, this is when a bigger wrestler uses their weight and gravity to take out their foe. Hulk Hogan would jump up and drop a leg drop to create many iconic moments. Earthquake would squish opponents, and even a snake. The legendary Yokozuna flattened opponents with his signature bonsai drop, or Then there are those who will splash from the top rope. Whether it's an elbow drop from Randy Savage or a big splash from Superfly Jimmy Snuka, these moves were staples of the 1980s. Then with the rise of lucha libre and the influence of Japanese lightweight wrestlers, professional wrestling saw its athletes take to the air for some of the most awe-striking finishing moves. Eddie Guerrero or Rob Van Dam or even D'Lo Brown dropping their own version of a frog splash. This would include a shooting star press from Billy Kidman, a picture-perfect moonsault from the Blue Meanie, or maybe a swanton bomb from Jeff Hardy, or even a 450 splash from AJ Styles. It doesn't matter what it is. If it works, it works. If the move brings the audience to their feet, stops their heart while pausing time, and widens the eyes of every spectator, then it's a success. And there is a definite victory. Shoot interviews. We like being behind the curtain and velvet rope. Having knowledge on how something is made or being behind the scenes is appealing to a lot of people. Interviews have become a staple in all forms of media over the years. Essentially, knowledge is power. That power comes in many forms. Some people just like useless information. There are those who want to know everything they can about everything they want to know everything about. We all deep dive into the ponds that appeal to us. Sports fans know stats from decades past. Movie fans know what happened behind the camera of their favorite movies. Political fans know what really happened and keep tabs on what's going on at the very moment. The power of knowing all about a beloved topic has become as common as a game show that rewards it. This is all thanks to the sharing of information, and if people want it, it's there. The world of politics, sports, and entertainment have become 24/7 news fodder. Professional wrestling provides all three in the same 24/7 time frame. The reveal about professional wrestling being predetermined was exposed in newspapers going back to the mid-1980s. From that point, the protected kayfabe of wrestling has been exposed. There would be exposés on news shows that would expose the business. There was even a special called Exposed, Pro Wrestling's Greatest Secrets, that aired on NBC in prime time during the late 1990s. The idea that professional wrestling is not a legit fight is nothing unheard of. Everyone knows what it is. Superfans want to know everything that's going on. So being exposed to the inner workings of professional wrestling has become part of the fun. And where there is a demand, there is a supply. In the 1990s, tape trading crazed fans across the globe traded matches and shows with each other via VHS. After a few weeks of waiting for the mail, you could be caught up with a market outside of your own. This was the perfect avenue for small production companies to sit down with a wrestler for a candid, tell-all interview and then sell it on mass-produced VHS tapes. Companies like High Spots, RF Video, Smart Mark Video, and later kayfabe commentaries would film performers on their way up, their way down, or in between. They would go deep on backstage decisions, crazy road stories, and dish the dirt on their experiences in the business. These were the connection to the wrestlers that diehard fans yearned for. It would not be unthinkable to think that 1 million tapes were traded, passed on, or sold. And then the internet happened. Like any artistic medium, downloading became an issue, and the common form of tape trade would soon become digital. Then the podcast happened. A new avenue of verbal destruction was given to the world. A wrestler will now give their shoot interviews through audio or video podcast. It's the same concept as shoot interviews of the 90s. Backstage stories are shared. Wars of words are had. Bridges are burnt to a crisp. And the look behind the curtain is opened a little more. And the beauty of the internet is that a shoot interview can be had directly after a news item breaks. And thanks to these shoot interviews, we diehard fans have gone so far behind the curtain that there is no looking back. Cheap heat. We live in a world full of cliches and stereotypes. There are certain rituals that strike a common nerve. With this, performers, speakers, and just about everyone keeps these tropes up their sleeves. It could be taking a bow to cue the audience to applaud, or it could be making a silly face at a baby to get a giggle. And then there's also the alternative, a negative response. You take the unpopular opinion or find the easiest way to antagonize. It does not have to be a verbalized attack. Even when they say sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, we, the human race, came up with gestures. If there's an easy way to manipulate a reaction, professional wrestling is gonna be there. Professional wrestling's foundation is built on recycled tropes. Fans will pop or cheer for the good guy, but when a bad guy goes for a negative reaction, it's getting heat. And the simplest form of this is cheap heat. In the older days and even now, overly patriotic crowds will boo a foreign wrestler. One doesn't have to rely on jingoistic crowds for cheap heat. It's yelling at children on the way to the ring. It's ripping up a sign that a fan worked on at home and brought to the show. It's mocking the local sports team. It's disrespectful, mean, and crude, but it's rarely ever witty or intelligent. It's doing the simplest and easiest of tasks, to poke at the emotional bear that is a professional wrestling crowd. And if you don't like that, always remember, your town sucks. Hats. A hat is worn for warmth, religion, or just a fashion accessory. These head coverings has a deep history as any other wardrobe option. Ancient artwork going back to BC times showcases evidence of hats in human culture. The purposes would evolve over time. From practical use to status symbols, there has pretty much always been hats worn by many different people. The warmth and style of headwear is no stranger to the wardrobe of professional wrestling. In the 1950s, the Australian tag team the Fabulous Kangaroos were famous for wearing their slouch hats from their native land. However, the earliest hats in wrestling would definitely be the crowns worn by kings, or cowboy hats worn by, well, cowboys. This tradition would carry on to this day. The likes of Jerry the King Lawler and just about every winner of the King of the Ring tournament has proudly worn their royal crowns. As for cowboy hats, the rugged brutes Stan Hansen, Bill Watts, and numerous others have walked to the ring in either a black or white cowboy hat. It doesn't end with the wrestlers. One of the most renowned announcers and personalities in Jim Ross is known for his signature cowboy hat. There are fedoras, berets, baseball caps, beanies, and many more hat varieties in between. Professional wrestling is full of characters from all walks of life with their own sense of style. And of course, they're gonna need hats. Giants. All creatures come in different shapes and sizes. There are hummingbirds, wiener dogs, and goldfish. But there are also the bigger variations. There are eagles, mastiffs, and whales. The same goes for humans. The tallest man in history is Robert Wadlow, standing in at 8 foot 11 inches tall. While not every giant is as tall as Mr. Wadlow, there are a plethora of examples of giants. For every Muggsy Bogues or Spud Webb, there's a Shaquille O'Neal or Manute Bol. The Bible even tells us about the Goliath, while other literature carries on mythos of giants and larger-than-life beings. And it doesn't get much larger than life than professional wrestling. The stature of big men in wrestling goes back to the start of wrestling. There will always be giants, but Giant Haystacks made a name for himself in the 1970s, being a 6'11" behemoth. Over the timeline of wrestling, there have been plenty of near and surpassing 7-foot stars. There is Kevin Nash, Kane, The Big Show, Viscera, and the Great Khali, to name a few, all current or future WWE Hall of Famers. Then there is Giant Gonzalez, billed at 8 foot tall, Gene Snitsky, Kurgan, and the Yeti. If one is making a Mount Rushmore of professional wrestling, there are a few great men that are gonna get their own monuments in The Undertaker, and of course, the giant of them all, Andre the Giant. From 1973 to 1991, the 8th wonder of the world, Andre the Giant, soaked up the jaw-dropping, eye-widening, and awestruck responses from millions of professional wrestling fans. He is, without a doubt, the giant of all giants, and his legacy is permanent. There have always been many characters in professional wrestling, but if you have to look up, and then look up even higher than that, well then, a gigantic impact has been made.